Resuming debate?
Resuming debate.
Resuming debate.
So Ryan, welcome to my Parliament Hill office. It's good to see you in person.
It's great to actually be here. We watched you a lot in committee. Our viewers have watched you a lot in committee. They love your quick wit and your brilliant retorts.
Thank you.
And everyone always references the potted plant now. So.
Right. Yeah, so just for those who, and I know we're going to be maybe releasing this in a few different places. So Ryan runs a YouTube channel called Northern Perspectives. And I've said this a few times to you, but I'm amazed that there's a YouTube channel, and there's others that are doing similar stuff that is focused on parliamentary committees and really providing color commentary around it. You cover it like a sporting event, and it's more than a sporting event. It touches on public policies, but that's important. But it can also be really entertaining. So it's neat how you've, I think, just brought so many people into the halls of Parliament through the way you share that information.
Well, it's interesting you say that because people start kind of lining up for the live streams, in some cases an hour before. And it's interesting you say that it's almost like a sporting event, because the people have almost started to treat it like a sporting event to the point where one user remarked, I never thought I'd be waiting for a committee meeting to start, and I approached that with the same, if not more anticipation than like a Stanley Cup final game. But I think it's because the veil has been lifted for them, and they understand what goes on in committee now because of what we do, and people love the breakdowns that we give, and it's accidentally entertaining, which always helps.
Yeah. And it's been the changing dynamic of the way people can interact with Parliament, where the press gallery is much smaller. There's less reliance on the press being kind of the mediator of that information. But a lot of people are just able to go direct. You guys are showing what's happening with commentary, and people can obviously just go direct to the parliamentary website. But a lot of people don't necessarily know yet where to find that or how to find it. But it's great that people can actually just see the place in action rather than relying on a secondhand kind of reflection of the process.
For sure. And one of the things that we try to do, we always do, is we always put whatever sources that we're using for any of our videos in our descriptions. So now, well, I should say before, when we were covering committee, people would just wait for our live stream. Now they know where to find it. So what they'll do now is they'll watch committee live during the day, and then they'll wait, and then they'll watch the live stream to get our take on it. And it's really important now, because when we have situations like what's happened in the Status of Women's Committee, where Kate Alexander and Megan Walker were just completely shut down by the Liberals, and they weren't able to tell their story. So we reached out to Kate Alexander afterwards and invited her on the show, and she was able to get Megan Walker as well, and Carmen Roy, and we had a really powerful discussion, so they were able to actually get their message out. So it's really, really important that non-mainstream media is covering this, because mainstream media doesn't cover committee, not at all. And with the amount of corruption that is exposed in committee, and that's what we tell Canadians, question period isn't really the government. Question period is just one piece of it. Committee is where the work happens. So
it's there's a lot of things that go on during the day here, but committee is really where you drill deep on a particular issue, right? And a lot of things that happen in the House started at committee. Something will start to be explored, delved into at committee, and then it will lead to a debate in the House or questions in question period. We're mainly planning on talking, I think, about the issue of political discrimination, though, which kind of has interacted with you and your work on the channel.
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about what happened. Sure. So we started Northern Perspective back in January of 2023. The main purpose of that was to fund our son's autism therapy, because with everything in Canada, everything is so expensive. Even though I had a government job, we were not able to afford that. So we were hoping to basically cover that. We were hoping to get 1,000 subscribers by the end of the first year, and unbeknownst to us, we filled a niche that was in demand. So
I didn't know that about the channel, by the way. So it really started as a needing to support something important in your family. So that's interesting. And that I guess that frankly that reflects a challenge a lot of Canadians are having right now, is maybe looking for a second job to cover some important expenses for their family.
Yeah, we see that a lot, and like Tanya is, my wife is involved in moms groups, and they're taking a second, third job, and this was essentially my second job in order to do that. So, and I wanted to make sure that I was doing this in line with my day job, and so we used voice modulators, we used like these terrible animated puppets, and we used pseudonyms so no one could tell who we were. We would also plant false information in terms of our location so people wouldn't know where we were. So many of our viewers say, "I thought you guys were in Alberta." So,
right.
Great. So we were doing our job.
You're a public servant. You're working for the government, and when you're a public servant, you can have different political perspectives, but you're there to, in the context of your specific work, implement the direction of the government, right? You're allowed to criticize the government, but when you're at work, you're implementing government policy. Right,
and I did very well at work. My first two years, because I started in 2021, I received basically near perfect performance reviews. Really turned the IT department around at the agency I was at. Saw a lot of government waste, but that's a different conversation. And then in October of 2023, we really started covering the Arrive scam debacle when the Whistleblowers came out and the Globe and Mail article came out, and everyone knows that. And then it was, I think, specifically after David Yeo came to committee, where it was found, I guess shortly after that he was a Department of National Defense contractor, but also the owner of Dalian, that really prompted the government to really want to know every employee's side income if wherever possible. So that prompted me to disclose Northern Perspective, and I was given a choice whether to either divorce myself from the channel or I would have to exit the organization. So obviously I'm still with Northern Perspective, and I am no longer a government employee.
Ironically, so far at least, you're the only public servant who's lost their job because of the Arrive scam. not the people who were involved in the actual scandal. Hopefully we'll have a government lose their position at some point soon, resulting from the scandal. But I mean, it does seem to me, just hearing kind of you describe the two jobs you had, that it must have been kind of an interesting experience seeing government waste in the context of your day job, and then also kind of covering it on a YouTube channel, right? So how do you describe kind of that process of I guess keeping those roles distinct?
So I'm really good at compartmentalizing, and I consider myself to be a person of very high moral standards. I stick to my principles, and that means not doing the wrong thing and doing the right thing, even if that means facing consequences. So what we did is ensured that whatever we covered had nothing to do with our agency, and everything that we talked about was publicly available. If it was not publicly available, we would not talk about it on the channel. We wouldn't distribute that information, because that would be against the bond that I took with the government. So, there was meetings where I was in with Mindone, and it was kind of surreal seeing, him in meetings with, 50 other IT leaders in the government. But it was also very, very shocking to me, even coming in from the private sector, and just seeing the waste upon waste upon waste that just would not be tolerated in a private corporation.
And I guess a big question is, like, if you were taking different political positions on the channel, would your treatment have been the same or different? Like if you were, because on the one hand, maybe you could say if there was a policy saying, well, you just can't have a large following talking about political issues outside of government, and that doesn't appear to be the case. There are other public servants who, and I mean, important for people to understand, right? Public servants can participate in politics in certain ways at certain levels.
Yep.
There are limitations, and the limitations, I think it's fair to say, they vary across the public service, right? Like, so if you're at a higher level, if you're what works if you're working a call center at CRA is different from what works if you're a deputy minister, right? But I guess the core question is, would a person doing your same job who had a YouTube channel that had a different political perspective, that wasn't critical of the government of the day, would they have faced the same treatment or different treatment? And that, I suppose, is the question that you're going to be pursuing.
Yes, and that's the question that is, that I wrestle with. And because, on one hand, let's say the argument was, well, you're not biased, you're not unbiased. Okay, well, that's fine. Then if I'm not unbiased, I'm criticizing the Trudeau government. Why am I criticizing the Trudeau government or the Liberals and not the Conservatives? Well, who's the government right now? It's not the Conservatives, it's the Liberals. So it doesn't really make sense that I would leverage any criticism to any other party.
Yeah.
And then the second piece to that is, if I'm not criticizing the Trudeau government and I'm praising the Trudeau government, then the argument would be, well, you're fulfilling the mandate of the agency and the public service anyway, which is to execute the government's vision. So, when you kind of lay it out like that, it forces the question, well, then how could, if someone is being penalized for criticizing the government in power, how could any public servant not be penalized for criticizing the government in power, which is every Canadian's democratic right?
Yeah. Public servants in certain kinds of roles, they're implementing government policy in various ways, and in some cases they're preparing statements that defend government policy. If you work in a communications function as a public servant, then you're going to be defending the government of the day's decisions, regardless of your own personal convictions. And when the government changes, you're going to be defending the new government of the day. But you still can have your life outside of that. So it's interesting, because it does seem like there's a lot of important questions at play in your case.
And in speaking with my legal counsel, he has looked through case line. He said there hasn't been a case like this yet, and he said, so there's not really a lot of precedent for it. And I said, oh, well, that's interesting. Might as well be first. So because there's other people that I'm aware of that have worked for the government, had an opinion, and now they no longer work for the government, but they weren't able to use a platform to stand up and tell their story. So we're hoping that people see that there's some people that have those convictions and are able to stand up.
Well, part of why we wanted to have this conversation too is just to share. You had mentioned, I think it was good opportunity to sort of think about this bill. I put forward a private member's bill recently, Bill C-257, and that is to tackle the problem of political discrimination. Right now, there are various human rights statutes at various levels. There's a Federal Human Rights Act that prohibits discrimination, and the federal one applies to the federally regulated sector. So it would include the federal government, but also the federally regulated private sector, which is about 10% of the economy. Things like interprovincial transportation and crown corporations. So that Human Rights Act prohibits discrimination on certain identified grounds. such as race, religion, sexual orientation, marital status. There's a fairly long list, but one thing that's not on the list is political belief or activity. Theoretically, a bank, although they could not refuse to give you an account on the basis of your religion or your sexual orientation or some other identified criteria, they could refuse to give you a bank account because they don't like your political views. So the goal of this bill was to say that exclusion of political views doesn't make sense, and people shouldn't be discriminated against based on their political views. There is an exception, and probably if this bill had passed, your employers would try to invoke the exception of what's called a bona fide occupational qualification, saying it's legitimate for a particular workplace to identify certain political convictions as being a criteria of the job. For example, if a political office would be an obvious example, or a political party, right? A political party isn't going to hire somebody likely for any role who doesn't vote for that party, even if they are hired for a job that's not directly partisan, because it's a political party. It's an organization with that very clear political objective. So that's an exception. It's an exception that applies in other categories of discrimination, right? If you are hiring for a job that requires someone to be able to perform certain physical tasks, someone might be excluded from that who has a disability because they're not able to perform the tasks of the job. But what this bill is dealing with is instances of political discrimination that would not be covered by a bona fide occupational qualification. So if you're an airline and you're hiring pilots, the bill would prevent. I'm not aware of a case like this, but hypothetically, it would prevent an airline from saying we're not going to hire you as a pilot because we don't like your political views.
You're a member of the Rhino Party or something.
Right?
Like
Yeah, for sure. I think if this bill were in place, it would address or provide at least a framework for. And I was careful to say about this bill, like people bring up different cases, and every case is adjudicated in the context of a kind of a collection of different rights, considerations about what are legitimate bona fide occupational qualifications. In the very extreme, if someone holds very extreme or violent political perspectives, it would be probably legitimate for an employer in almost any context to say someone who has certain kinds of views just cannot fit well in almost any workplace. But that's at the very sort of extreme marginal case. I guess the point is it does, adding that as part of the Human Rights Act, I think provides a good framework for thinking about how we prevent discrimination, including discrimination on the basis of political views.
Yeah, I think so, and it's interesting that it hasn't been included in the Human Rights Act about this, because it seems like we've added every other foreseeable type of belief, and it's just really unfortunate because so many people's lives have already been affected by political discrimination, especially over the last 10 years, and in some cases people's lives are destroyed by it. Even if this bill can't pass this term, I'm hopeful it'll pass under the next government.
So what do you see? You mentioned sort of the increase over the last 10 years. Like, what do you see as being the particular growth areas in terms of political discrimination? It seems to me that, like in decades past, our society might have been more polarized on other dimensions. And today, we see in many cases a breaking down of some of those other barriers, but a real sharpening of political polarization. And political views coming more and more to define people's identities. By the way, I don't think that's necessarily healthy. I think we should understand that politics is downstream from other things, and there should be things in our lives that are more important to us than our politics. But it is the trend that there is this increasing polarization and defining of identity based on politics, and the rise of concerns around political discrimination. I would highlight two specific things. One is COVID, in terms of all its social effects, and then the other is the rise of kind of woke corporatism and the increasing kind of alliance between the left, which historically would have been more critical of the role of corporations in society, that's now really embraced corporatism and the use of corporate power to advance its objectives. So in terms of COVID, inevitably, politics, which might have been before private, became more public. It became public in families, it became public in churches, it became public in workplaces, because on questions that people were kind of grappling with, masking, vaccination, there were people that, and this wasn't necessarily about politics. You could have people that had voted one way or another way before who I think there were people who voted for left-wing parties traditionally who were more reluctant to get the vaccinations, and then you had people who had voted for traditionally for more center-right parties who were very afraid of the effects of COVID, and so it wasn't like it all broke down based on politics, but what became kind of related to politics, how you responded to and were trying to protect yourself from the virus, or how seriously you took it one way or the other, it was visible, and it was something that ended up needing to be talked about if policies were being set around vaccination. So that led to conflict and hard feelings, and it made politics in so many parts of our life public, maybe in spaces that could have been places where politics were kept private and weren't at the forefront. And that led to employers having policies that maybe led to conflict in the workplace too. Then the other issue is, and I think this is very clear now, a kind of political realignment that's happened where at one time you would have heard kind of critiques from the political left of corporate power in general, and I think there are sort of different aspects to those critiques, but they would position themselves as being there to defend the rights of workers, and now there's this rise of, I guess, what you call woke capitalism, where big corporations publicly embrace certain kinds of ideological causes or values, and that they're sort of pushed to by the government, by people on the left, and the problem with that is that sometimes they're taking positions that are legitimately contestable positions, and yet they're using their corporate power to push a particular view of the common good. I think the free market economy is a great thing, but we're not talking about the free market economy here. We're talking about kind of social values being pushed on a one shareholder, one vote basis instead of on a one person, one vote basis. And one of the mechanisms through which that can happen is political discrimination. When large, powerful corporations, social media companies, banks, whatever it is, say, we want our employees to participate in something or not participate in something. We are going to project certain messages about what the common good should be. And sometimes I think you can see cases where those corporations are actually pushed to take positions by governments, and yet they're using their power in ways that are not as transparent as direct government action would be. So that has been part of a kind of realignment that we're seeing happen. And I want to protect the rights of workers. to have opinions, workers and customers of big corporations, to have opinions, to advance their convictions in a free, open, democratic society without interference or discrimination from government, and also without interference or discrimination from large corporations using their power to push social values in order to curry favor with government or to curry favor with particular other elite interests.
So, well, and we were seeing that, like one of the government policies that is going through HR departments across the government is, the diversity, equity, and inclusion hiring policies. And, I was in a discussion where I raised the point. I said, okay, so what's the goal of this? And the goal was allegedly to ensure that our workplaces, in terms of demographics, reflected Canada. So, we had different percentages laid out for us in terms of different demographics, like how many black people, how many white people, et cetera. And I said, okay, so let me get this straight. So let's say I have two candidates, and they're both good for the job. One is a white male, one is a black woman. Who do I have to hire? Well, you have to hire the black woman. I said, isn't that discrimination? No. Okay, how do you fix discrimination by practicing discrimination? And these are the type of conversations that people are wrestling with. And, and what I've noticed is something that I've started saying is the more tolerant a society tries to be, the more intolerant it inevitably becomes. Because if you are trying to essentially be equitable to every single group out there, it's impossible, because you are inevitably going to be prioritizing one group over the other, or one person over the other, in order to attain that equity. And you can't do that. You are now trampling on people's rights. And then, with regard to COVID, I completely agree. All of a sudden, policies made healthcare decisions political. And I think if the government, just took a breath when all this was going on, they would have seen that that's what the convoy was about. It was the fact that, we don't want our healthcare to be politicized. And the good news is, I think the corporations are waking up, ironically, to wokeness, and realizing that they've been making decisions based on a tiny percentage of people talking really loud and influencing policy, whereas when they implement that and put that into corporate strategy, they see it's failing, because the vast majority of people don't agree with it, and they will vote with their wallets. And that's what Bud Light has found out. That's what Disney is finding out. And that's what Molson Coors has found out, because they are now walking away from their DEI policy as well, because they see the effect that it has on their balance sheet.
I mean, just to your first point, like I would zero in on advancing the idea of inclusive meritocracy, right? So, and both of those concepts are important, right? So, I think inclusive meritocracy means people rising based on their ability, their efforts, and also ensuring that the system does not have barriers, or working to remove barriers that prevent people.
Right.
Because I think sometimes when people talk about meritocracy, there may be invisible barriers that are missed. And so, working towards creating an inclusive environment where anybody can put themselves forward based on what they have to offer and their abilities, but not where it's just like, well, you gotta go through the checklist,
yeah,
right. But I think that the non-discrimination framework, saying people shouldn't face discrimination on the basis of any of the existing criteria, but also they shouldn't face discrimination on the basis of political perspectives, and that people should be able to just have conversations about these things, right? I mean, how do we build a more just, meritocratic, inclusive society?
We need to get back to just a moderate middle ground. And I tell you, Justin Trudeau labeling Canadians as racist, fascists, misogynists, that doesn't help. And that's where he's really fermented this divide. He's torn families apart, where you'll have one family member as a conservative and the other as a liberal, and they're not talking. because they can't have rational discourse because they're seeing what the Prime Minister is saying, and you're saying, well, if you're a conservative, you're a misogynist, you're a racist, and you're whatever. And you're talking about far right versus far left, and most of the people are in between, and they're just regular Canadians trying to get by.
We're going to get there if we minimize political discrimination, so that people feel free to ask questions, to express doubts, to say, is this really working or not, or could we do this thing better? So what we're seeing more and more from the left is an effort to stifle conversations or even questions, and I tend to say, like, good ideas win fair debates. That's why if we have a society in which corporations and governments aren't using their power to try to stifle conversation, then bad ideas can be countered with good ideas and with proper explanations. So, but I think a non-discrimination framework makes sense, and political discrimination alongside other kinds of discrimination, it can be addressed by the existing tools that we already have to address these things. Right,
and it doesn't matter if your employer is leaning left or is on the right. Yeah. I think there's going to be a danger after the realignment of the political forces in Canada that some people on the left may start to experience that similar discrimination, and that's wrong. That shouldn't happen.
Well, we would be opposed to that happening, right. Certainly. I mean, but in a hypothetical case, if you have an employer who's prefers a Conservative Party, and they've got an employee who is involved in left of center activism outside of work, I would say, as long as that's not interfering with the work or related to an occupational qualification, that person should be able to do that. And I would defend the right of that worker
100%
to be able to express their opinion. I would be suspicious that if someone had a popular YouTube channel that was saying, attaboy Duclos, doing a great job. I suspect the person behind that YouTube channel would not have faced the same kind of headwinds that you face. I mean, I don't know that, but I that would be my strong suspicion.
Well, we'll see what happens, and as I said, I think this is a common sense bill, and that's where Canadians, have to get back to. And it's amazing, people think that when the Conservatives keep saying common sense, that it's a slogan. Common sense shouldn't be a slogan. The problem is common sense is not common anymore, and we need to make sure that we keep talking about common sense and bring that back to what should be the norm. Because early on I wrote Pierre a letter talking about I didn't recognize my country anymore. It almost felt like I woke up in a different country. I didn't recognize it. And Canadians are desperate to get that home back that we had 20 years ago. Where there wasn't political discrimination. But we've realized that it can happen and it needs to be protected. So I think any and all Canadians should be for this bill, no matter what side of the aisle they support.
Yeah, I agree. And just to build on your comments, what I find when our Conservative leader speaks is he uses these clear phrases that are loaded with profound meaning. So the common sense of the common people, united for our common home. And oftentimes what is involved with political discrimination is powerful elites, companies that have particular financial interests or that are trying to curry favor with the government, that are trying to prevent common people, their employees, their customers, from being able to freely express their convictions and to live authentically and speak authentically about their political ideas without facing discrimination. And when you have that kind of elite control of the political conversation, that prevents the common sense of the common people from coming out. And it's often said that common sense isn't as common as it used to be, but I think common sense is more common than reading the editorial page or listening to CBC would make you think. There are a lot of ideas that are held and advanced by political and media elites that are not common sense and are not representative of the common experience of most people. So policies that oppose political discrimination open up that space for the common sense of normal people to be heard in the conversation to a greater extent.
Well, and frankly, that's going to allow our country to heal again.
Yeah.
Because if you can't talk or prevented about talking with somebody in your family or in the workplace, just about, here's my perspective, it's different than yours, but let's have a conversation. Like, this country needs a lot of healing to do. And in order to do that, we have to be able to have those conversations.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for coming into the office. Great
Thank you,
to see
sir.
you in person. Take care.
All right.